Hi, everyone. Hope that you are all keeping well on your Wellbeing Wednesday this month. Just a little disclaimer, I am full of a cold, so I do apologize. I do have my little box of tissues with me before I go into the session today. But a reminder if and when you are watching this, this Wednesday is the same as last month. I am available online. So if you're watching it in live time at the 8 p.m. session, I'd be there for any questions or comments. But equally, if you're watching at any other point, please feel free to let Bon know, or if you have anything you want me to delve into further next month, please, just send that feedback and information that I'll remind you on Bon's page. And you'll see underneath where I post this, exactly where you can send or share those comments. So hi everyone. I know there's lots of people coming and going from the course. So I am Megan. I'm really honored to be here. This week I thought we would explore a topic that I genuinely, it's interesting. I want to kind of start with this little story. So in Canada, I don't know if there are any Canadians in the group at the moment, but we always did something called kind of like an oral examination where we had to speak every year, really. I think probably from about year one or two, or grade one or two. And every year, I remember it was such a big deal to think about like what would be your topic to talk about. And at like the dear age of, I think I was 12 or 13, 12, I chose to talk about what I'm going to speak about today, which goes to show that even at age 12, I found this like such a difficult topic. And so it's interesting because today's topic, it's all about decisions, especially making hard decisions and some of the science behind it. So I've kind of titled it, Decide with Confidence, a mind and body system for hard choices. And I thought this was really helpful because after doing some research for myself and for you, I was trying to figure out like what would be a good way for me to really wrap my head around like why decisions sometimes can be so hard. Why is it that I spend so many hours thinking about something before I actually go out and do it? And how many other people, maybe you guys might be in the same position as me, maybe sat on a thought, we kind of have a feeling about what we should do, but why is it that we're not quite getting there? So I wanted to kind of talk to you a little bit about that tonight. Let's kind of dig into a little bit about, decisions. What is it for us as human beings? We're going to look a little bit at neuroscience. And we're also going to talk a little bit about a connection with the theorist Mel Robbins. She does a really great piece on this. I keep referencing her because I'm finding her work very in the now and actually very relevant. So hopefully you enjoy our chat today. I loved this kind of question to open up our chat today, but what if somebody said to you that the hardest decisions you've ever made weren't about whether they were right or wrong, but sometimes about fear versus clarity? And that really stuck with me because I think if I were to reflect deep down, anytime I had a really tough choice, I bet you if I sat down in the quiet and asked myself, what is it the right answer? I think I always kind of know. And if I don't, with a bit of time, I think in my gut, I kind of know which way that I'm leaning. And that's quite interesting. I think the fear comes in making hard decisions on what other people think, other people's reactions, how and when does this happen? It's less about what is the decision. And so often it's about the how and the when and what does that look like. And so I thought we would break that down a little bit. We'll explore kind of why the hard decisions feel hard, and maybe learn a really nice practical system rooted in neuroscience, nervous system regulation, and self-awareness to kind of help us build lasting confidence in making those harder decisions. Interesting, isn't it, to kind of think about the brain, but also like our gut or intuition, and what is that? So let's talk a little bit about brain first, and then we'll go in a little bit into our sort of intuition and or our gut response, that sort of thing. So yeah, the neuroscience and nervous system. So we're talking a little bit about brain, and we're talking a little bit about how that feels in the body. But the prefrontal cortex, that that frontal part where we make our clear decisions, that handles our long-term planning, our logic, our executive decisions. So any of those big things that we need to do, our prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that helps us see that clearly. But we have our amygdala, which I'm sure you've gone through with Fawn, or maybe in my last well-being session. We think about the amygdala. I always call it a little bit of like our fire alarm. It kind of like sets off sometimes like mine's super sensitive, and it sets off like my actual fire alarm sets off, and I'm like, oh, if there's like just a little bit of smoke in there, something's dripped in my oven, and here I'm like waving the smoke alarm and opening the doors, but actually there's not much really, there's nothing at all that's a problem. But my amygdala is going off sometimes. And when the amygdala is going off, that is your body. That's the part of the brain that's telling you, like, I'm not sure if this is safe. And all of a sudden, our prefrontal cortex feels a little bit foggy. And it often goes off with even small things like uncertainty, or potential for loss, or obviously deep-rooted fear. And those of us with a background of trauma, we obviously have this kind of connection with sometimes not quite being as present as possible, or as clear. Fogginess is very normal and common. And so therefore, sometimes our amygdala is oversensitive, isn't it? Because we have a reason for it to be, our body wants to protect us. And so when faced with a hard decision, what's interesting is both are activated. And that creates like this big, wild internal conflict. You could imagine your alarm's going off, your brain's trying to make a decision, and you're trying to figure this out. And whatever it is, the job that you're in that you've been meaning to leave, or the unhealthy relationship, friendship, whatever that it is that you've been thinking like something needs to change here. Sometimes what happens is, because that feels like this internal conflict, we potentially go into like what we call a freeze response. And that's quite interesting in itself, isn't it? Kind of going into a little bit of a freeze. And so hard decisions often trigger this freeze, which means it's not because you don't know, but because your nervous system kind of thinks that whatever it is that you're trying to decide upon poses for a risk. And all of a sudden you're kind of in this, like, I'm just not going to do anything, or I'm going to put that off a little bit longer. And Mel Robbins, I don't think it was her quote, but she says sometimes that no decision is an actual decision, isn't it? So choosing not to do something is actually a decision in itself. So anyways, I think that that's an interesting thought, isn't it? The longer that maybe we put something off, maybe it is within us to maybe think about how can we maybe make those decisions. It'll feel lighter for us in the end. And there's a theory, on procrastination that's called eat the frog, which I find very interesting. But they say that if you are holding on to a frog, that might be the hardest decision or the hardest job that you need to do in that day. It's the one that you're thinking about the longest, but actually not actually shifting or doing anything towards. Sometimes it can be very energetically draining, and it can make you feel low. But the second that you tackle that, no matter how difficult it might be, when you eat the frog, they say, when you kind of do the really hard thing, that it starts to shift the entire like energy in your life. It makes you feel like, and gets back that resilience and confidence. So it's just an interesting thought today, maybe eating the frog. If you YouTube it, there's a really cute little video. It's more from a work thing, but it's also, I think, that a great theory for life. Those decisions that we're not making can sometimes weigh really heavy. And then we're living a little bit longer in this internal conflict, and our body then is not in a calm space. It's in a space of kind of fight or flight, isn't it? Or freeze. And so then that means that, the nervous system maybe feels the energy of anxiousness or overwhelm, or other things feel hard. where, you've got that amygdala going off, even if it's quiet. So yeah, just take a deep breath. And the reason why we love to go through the neuroscience in this course is because we love for you all to remember that you are human, and it is okay. Like, there's nothing wrong with you, and there's nothing wrong with the fact that your body and your brain feel uncomfortable in uncertainty, especially if you have a hard decision to make. It's not, you might not right now in your life, but maybe you do. Maybe there is something that's been weighing on you, or at some point you might come across that again, and you might think, oh, my body, my brain, I'm putting this off. I know that it's draining me, so maybe I need to stop and maybe make a little bit of a step towards it. All right, a step in the direction of making that change. And Mel Robbins, she then speaks a lot about this idea of our intuition. So when it comes to decision making, I found Mel's concepts very relatable, because she said we have two sides of the coin. So we have our intuition, or our gut. And that's when you actually sat back. And if I say we're thinking about a relationship, if your thought, or maybe it's a job, if thinking about being in that job in, this time next year, if I said to you, this time next year, you're still sat in that same job, and all you get from that question is like a drain and a little bit of like dread, then in your intuition that doesn't sit well with you. It doesn't align with you, and that's okay. It's okay to want something different. Or in a relationship, if you thought the same, whether that's a friendship, a business partner, whatever it is, but we're thinking within ourselves, like, if that looks like a dread and a drain, then in your intuition, then the decision is to part from that or whatever. But if your decision if you start thinking about another aspect of something, and your decision starts to make you feel like, oh, that like opens up some ideas. I feel like an energetic feeling. I feel a little bit like, okay, this could be cool. There's some sort of optimism around that feeling. If you're thinking about, in a year's time being with that person, you're thinking, oh, I wonder where that's going to be and what that feels like. Your gut or your intuition, that there's a system within us as human beings that tell us what we need. And we all kind of have this, like, our values and how we've been constructed, and you will know when something aligns with you and when it doesn't align with you. So often it's the decision that people are asking help with, but the decision itself, so bear with me, the decision itself is often something you personally already know. But the hardest part of the decisions is to figure out. Then we go from like the intuition bit, then we have to turn on the brain and make a plan. And we need to figure out. So that's a good way of thinking about it. We need to maybe make a plan for how and when we make that decision. And that's sometimes where we stay in freeze. We don't do anything. So we often know what we want, but we don't know the how and the when. And so we want to think a little bit about that as we kind of move through our conversation. So I want you to think a little bit about that. She describes like this intuition or this gut reaction as like, imagine like it's your inner compass or your inner sort of GPS. And I love this kind of idea that, imagine like you're in your car and you are going somewhere where you haven't been before, and you get caught in a massive like rain thunderstorm. What you do, you can't see that far in front of you in the car, but you trust your GPS or your sat nav, whatever you call it. You trust it. So you just keep driving, and you just keep driving, and you know that you're going to eventually get there, because it's all, where you're headed, and you trust the GPS. Okay. That's pretty much the same thing, except the rainstorm is your emotions. So you know where you want to go, but sometimes it's very difficult to move through the emotions, because actually, as human beings, we are like, our human experience is emotional, and sometimes it's the emotions that get in the way of us making the decisions that we want, because of fear of the aftermath. We're afraid of what other people are going to think of our decisions, even though we know innately in us that it doesn't really align. she gives this great example of this guy who wrote to her anonymously about how he was due to get married, but he knew in his heart that getting married to this person, even though they were a good person, he was thinking like, I there's something in me saying like this wedding is not right. And so he writes to Mel and says like, what do I do? I'm dreading the idea of this. And so she kind of like likens this idea, which is very interesting. She goes, he wasn't writing to me to say, what decision do I make? Everyone's screaming at him, going, if you're not happy, then you need to get out. But he was asking, how do I do this? How do I get through this? And what happens when I upset all of these other people and all of this money that we spent and, this other person, etc. And I think that that's really powerful because we do need to, take responsibility for, maybe the how when we create an action in the direction of our our choices. But also I think Mel gives us this permission with her theory, let them, to understand that people are going to have an emotion, potentially based on a decision that you're making that might impact on their life. And it's really tough, isn't it, when your decisions impact and your feelings, and maybe there's an overwhelming fear of like what people are going to think of you. But what we need to also remember as well is that, is it worth you spending another year, another 2 years in this depletion, this energy depletion, this dread, this not so healthy, happy place? Or is it better to drive through the rainstorm, right? Like get behind the wheel of your life and just drive through it. And Mel just says, if you can be responsible in your decision, you can make the decision with kindness, you can come at it from a place of, truth, but, I think kindness, then no matter what people feel, people will feel. You have to remember they're human, so they will have feelings, but their feelings will, whatever, we have to let people feel because people are human. And I think that that's quite powerful to recognize, isn't it? It's awful if we have upset somebody, but what if you're, this man stayed and then all of a sudden 5 years into the marriage or whatever, I think that there's a responsibility there for maybe to make the tough decision in order to move you forward. So I think that we have to remember that your happiness, your well-being, you as a person, no matter what you've been through, your decision is valid, and the things that you want are valid, and the things that you believe in are important. And no, despite the hard decisions maybe that might arise in this life, it is about trusting, trust the intuition, and then we move to the brain in order to make the decisions and a plan. And it doesn't mean that just because you have to go and pull the plug straight away. But I think what you need to do is sit down and write a little plan. So for example, if it's a job, you're not going to go, hey, I really know that I want to leave my job. I can feel it in my gut. But financially, you know that you can't just up and pull the plug because you've got bills to pay. But could you sit down and make a 3 to 6 month plan and then start looking elsewhere? And maybe sometimes, I don't know about you, but that freedom in terms of looking elsewhere, looking at what your other opportunities are, starts to open up that energy for you. And that energizing feeling is that feeling telling you that you're working in alignment. You're working in alignment with who you are. And that's not airy fairy chat. That is who we are as humans. You will know what feels right for you and what doesn't feel right. Just give me a second. I'm sorry, not the nicest part of the session, but yeah. Oh, I don't know whether I've got a cold or just really bad hay fever this season, but by the end of the day, I think my meds are wearing off. So yeah, thanks for bearing with. So yeah, I really liked that idea. And I think, when the stakes are high, sometimes the right answer feels wrong. And I think that that's important. It's like the guy that wrote in and, clearly he did not want to get married, or that person wants to leave their job, or this relationship is just not working. It feels wrong sometimes, but you know it's the right answer. So I think the very first bit of advice is to take a breath. And maybe, I'm going to give you some techniques and ways in which you can break down your information. And sometimes it's really great to like write things out when you need to make a decision. I always find decision making really helpful when I've got a pen and a bit of a journaling task, but it can support you in kind of like deciding, yes, I know the right answer, but I need to find and make my plan to move in that direction in a way that feels good to me. So come across that confidence system, it's called, in making decisions. And the acronym is CALM, which is quite nice. So CALM. So it may be a nice one to think about. C is center yourself. We'll talk about that in a minute. A is ask the right questions. So I'll give you some questions to guide you on that. L is then listen a little bit more to your own inner wisdom or your intuition. And M is like make movement in that direction. So it's a nice way to start to give you that confidence and kind of move. So where we talked a little bit about the body might be in fight or flight, you might be feeling foggy, therefore you're not sure exactly what the decision is or what your plan could be. You can't think straight. What we need to do is regulate your nervous system first. So we need to see, for calm, it's going to be center yourself. So this is your system, maybe for tackling some of those tough decisions. So we need to regulate your nervous system. And I'm sure if you've not come across me in module 3, I'm all about nervous system regulation. So is Bon and some of your other therapists. So what we want to do maybe is take a moment now before we if you have a decision in your head, cool. If there's nothing like this that's coming up, no worries. But if there's something that you've been I like to use the word ruminate, you've been thinking about over and over and over, maybe you're thinking about the decision, thinking about what all, eventualities, maybe before we go into that, maybe have that idea in a little bubble. If not, no worries. This is great advice for other people as well. But let's calm your nervous system. So we're going to do some box breathing. We're going to breathe in for 4. We're going to hold for 4, exhale for 4, and then pause. I'm going to take you through that breath. And if you wanted to work through the calm system with me, maybe grab a little pen as well so you can stop and start the video. That's why it's quite nice sometimes to be pre-recorded. So we're going to go through the calm process with you, which is really quite helpful. So let's start with the breathing. Let's calm the nervous system. So inhale for 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold 2, 3, 4. Exhale 2, 3, 4. Pause 2, 3, 4. Inhale 2, 3, 4. Hold 2, 3, 4. Exhale 2, 3, 4. Pause 2, 3, 4. Inhale. Hold. Exhale. Pause. Breathing in. Holding. Exhale. Pause. And just let the breath go back to its natural state. Good. Just stopping and relaxing. If you're not quite feeling the body calm, you can try that again. You can come back to any of your other sort of nervous system regulation techniques. Just stop. Good. Now, what we have there in the breath is that we have something called our vagal response or a vagal nerve. That vagal nerve it kind of moves like from the back of the brain all the way down kind of into the gut. And by taking slow, deep breaths, what we're doing is we're activating our vagal response, which gives us that like increased access to our prefrontal cortex. We kind of get that back. We get it decreases our emotional reactivity. So it means that we can make choices without as much of the emotion and the overwhelm. I would actually say like maybe doing 3 or 4 rounds of box breathing. I like to draw the square on a piece of paper if you've not done that before, but there's other styles of breath work you can do. Tap into anything in the module that I actually did for your course with Bond, but also I know Bond goes through lots of these things as well. Beautiful. So number one, in our process for our calm for confident decision making, center yourself. Find something that makes you feel relaxed. Good. Another thing you could do is like pop on a meditation, something like that. Just slow, deep breaths, calm the body. Perfect. Then number two, this is where you might want a pen, or you can ask yourself in your head. So A is then ask yourself the right questions. Okay. So, excuse me. I do apologize. So A, ask yourself the right questions. So I want you to grab a pen and think about a scenario that may be a decision you've made in the past or something you're sitting on right now. You're just not sure where to move. So my first question is like, what if, for example, you fail? So just what if? What if you fail? So I want you to shift from that. So if you fail, anything that what if you hurt somebody? What if all of the negative things, we want to shift that away. So if you're asking yourself, like, what if I fail? That is where we're going to start to think of like all the negative things. And what I want you to think about is like, if that something comes up to mind, what if I fail? What if this doesn't go right? What if? Actually, I want you to think a little bit about these other questions. So you can think about that one so that we can get it out of our head. What if this doesn't, go the way I think? I think that those are the things that hold us back. Those are the things that set us in freeze. Sometimes it's good to do a brain dump if you're somebody like me who's thinking a lot about it. But the next bit is we're shifting from this, what if I fail? What if it doesn't work, to these questions. What do I truly value here? So I want you to ask yourself that one. So if you're trying to, I don't know, leave a job or a work situation, you have to ask yourself when you're making these decisions, like, what is it that I truly value? What is it? Like, what is it that means the most to you in all of this? What is the bit that you value? What is the stuff, where do your beliefs lie here in terms of like what aligns to you, what doesn't, And then the next question. So pause there and keep writing if you need to. So what do I truly value here? Is really important. And my next question, I think, is a super big one. And this might take a while to write on, or maybe it's very simple for you, but it's quite powerful. One that I find I come back to is, what is the cost of not deciding? What is the cost of just staying put? Excuse me. Most often that cost is your own well-being. We often put ourselves last, and that's not okay. We live one life, and you deserve to find things that feel good. You have a right to change a job. We're living in a time, or a right to shift that relationship. What is the cost of not deciding? It could be lots of really big things like external factors, but that is something that's highlighting it. It's important to maybe move in that direction. I've got another one for you. If I trusted myself fully, what would I do? I don't know about you, but that's a big one. If I trusted myself fully, what would I sit and do? What would I do here? If I fully trusted in me, that everything would be okay. I trust that everything's coming from a good place, that I'm trying to come from a good place of values. This is us getting out of the what if I fail and the catastrophizing thoughts, and we're pulling it back to why these decisions make such a difference. We're asking the right questions. What do I value here? What is the cost of not deciding? And if I trusted myself fully, what would I do? So write it down. I think you should write it down. Have a little think. Lovely. Thanks for that. And then L, so the calm. So A, so you've got your C, and that is center yourself. Then you have your A, let's ask the right question. So we're getting out of the negative thinking. You might do a brain dump on that one, but I would come back to those three core questions to center you, and then really keep, if you're somebody who then doesn't do much after that, come back to those questions, your value, cost of not deciding, and trusting yourself fully, those three. And then when you then L is listen to the wisdom of the body, which I think is really interesting. So what I want you to do is this, it's a really great exercise. So if you have a thought or a decision or something that you're trying to make, what I want you to do is imagine the two decisions. So the decision is to stay, and the decision is to change, leave, whatever it is, whatever the situation is, change the dynamic, change whatever it is. What I want you to do is think about the first option, where maybe it is just stay as it is. So maybe that's your first decision, or maybe that's, think about that first decision. And I want you to think a little bit about you. Sometimes it's nice to think in a year's time, like, what is going on in the body? What do you feel when I say that you will be in the same place in this decision next year, or in this same experience? And if the body feels tense, if the body's kind of just feeling low, I want you to recognize that, like, straight away, there's your intuition there. Now, I want you to think of your other option. You might not know the how, all right? You might not know the how, and you might not have a plan yet. But if your next option was in a year's time, what would it look like, your best case scenario, if you could sit happily in a new space in this, whether it's walking away, or there's a new working situation, or a new place of work, or new dynamic, or whatever your decision making is that's going to make you feel good. Maybe it's moving, whatever it is that you feel like. I want you to notice, like, just almost close your eyes, and I want you to get into like a nice visualization. See if you can get yourself a little bit in your mind and in your body into that space. I want you to kind of recognize, like, do you feel a little bit free? Sometimes I see people, when we do this in a face-to-face situation, people's like, take a big deep breath. I want you to think about what that looks like. There is your first thing, like expansion and contraction. If there's some level of a contraction, that your body doesn't align with it. If there's some sort of expansion, something that just makes you feel good, that is where you're kind of sat going, do you know what? I just know that that's what I need. I need to move into that direction. And there's your decision. And then, that's your intuition. That's the body. There's some really great journaling prompts. When I think about this decision, my body feels. So you could write that out. When I think about this decision, my body feels. Sometimes I get people to draw like a stick, like person version, and just like draw what it, little annotations around it. Option A feels like this, option B feels like this. And whatever it is, if you can listen, that's what we calling listening, the L, listen to the wisdom of the body. You will know. It just happens. And it's so interesting because there is like science behind this. But I remember when I was a kid, I don't know if it's like a worldwide thing, but I used to play like eeny, meeny, miny, mo, catch a tiger by its toe. And I remember as a kid knowing somewhere in me that if I played eeny, meeny, miny, mo for a decision that I didn't know, I remember saying in my head, I'll know, because if I land on, one thing, I'll know in my gut whether it's what I wanted or what I didn't. But until I've done the eeny, meeny, miny, mo game, sometimes I wouldn't know how I felt, because it was like it forced me to make like a mental choice. And then I knew straight away from my physical that, like, hey, I actually did want that sweet and not that sweet. So I want you to think, that's a small example, but you just know, like, you just know what you do and what you don't want when you take time to think about it. So great prompts there. And again, it's nice one because I'm using like journaling, but I want to say that really loosely. I always try and mention that journaling doesn't have to, you don't have to be a long writer. Sometimes just doing like a little circle around like option A or the stick man or something just in your brain, like getting some sort of words or visual on the page is enough. It doesn't have to be like a big long, like, diary entry. Journaling can just be like getting some sort of words on the paper. But yeah, so your L for your decision making, listening to the wisdom of the body, quite nice. And then you've got, your writing tasks. And then M is this idea, it says move into aligned action or move into some sort of action. And so the idea is like, don't wait for 100% certainty, move with, a bit of clarity and nervous system safety. So what you want to do is just take maybe take a time and say like, what could be a nice plan for me? And maybe that's a really great conversation in a coaching conversation. Can you think of one small step today to kind of honor your choice? Is there something small you could do right now? And this is where Mel Robbins then says, when we move from the gut, then we need to go back to the brain, and then we just need to think about our when and how, and we need to make a plan. And you will feel empowered in hard decisions if you can move through and make a plan and move through these things in a really responsible, kind way. And if you move in that direction, you will start to find that sometimes it was bigger in our head. Maybe, you think about this groom who called off the wedding. Well, actually, I think people were upset with him for a long time. But it did pass. And in the end, I think people were probably happier that he was honest at that point. And there was a real, strength in that choice, and a strength in the fact that, that the decision was made, and there wasn't this like deep unhappiness. So let's just reflect on that as we move through. Sometimes, the hardest decisions are, just something that we need to get in and drive through that rainstorm sometimes, and we have to trust. And where Mel Robbins' theory of let them, she says this idea that sometimes we just need to say, I'm going to let them feel what they need to feel. And that's not like an uncaring thing, but we need to let people be human, like we said before. And then the second part of her let them theory is let me just think about what my choices are and what I can do here. Because, we need to let people do them, but also just as much as you might feel a certain way about some other people's choices, people are bound to feel another way about yours. And you need to live your life in as much alignment as possible with who you are, because you deserve that. You deserve to have all these great things that you dream of. You deserve to feel light and free and calm in your life, and you deserve to, not always live in your fight or flight response. And sometimes taking a step in that direction will make such a big difference. So a little tiny micro action, maybe you can write down of like, what's one small thing you could do to make a step in that direction. And then every single time you act in a way in that kind of honors your intuition, honors like what you actually need, you start to build something called confidence capital. The more that you kind of move through these decisions, your body starts to recognize like, hey, I can trust myself. You kind of invest in self-trust. And so it might be something really difficult that you're going through, or really difficult in terms of the impact your decision could have on other people. But you have to remember that like we need to, move in that direction. Okay. You need to make those decisions and trust your intuition, and work in alignment. I think it's so, so important in our lives. So the more you do it, the more you'll start to trust yourself. And then you'll start to feel really good when you have to make tough decisions, because you'll be able to say like, hey, I just know this is right. And I know for the greater good. I know that let's come back to those three questions. Like, this like, following what you value, the cost of not deciding, and coming back to trusting yourself is super important. Okay. So do it because it'll help you build confidence and resilience. And that's something that we all think as a human race can work on, but find, and I was never always good at decisions. I'm still not, but I feel a little bit more empowered with this sort of theory, and just knowing with the let them theory, with the concept of calm. I always try to come back to these things so that I feel like I can just trust my inner GPS as I go through the rainstorm, or I move through the emotional side of things, and take a step in those directions. And do you want to know what? When I think about some of the toughest decisions, there was a job that I really struggled to leave. I really did. I was there years and years. And then for me, my small step was asking for a sabbatical. I couldn't quite bring myself to like fully leave. But in that sabbatical, I ended up like retraining in loads of things. And I really found like it was the best decision I ever made. And then it was easy or for me to then put in my resignation formally. I made a step in that direction. I wasn't quite ready to pull the plug. I didn't, I think in my gut, I knew that the can had expired. I sometimes say like, yeah, the can's expired in the cupboard. It doesn't mean that there's got to be any sort of like negatives, but it's just not aligning with this chapter that I'm in anymore. And I found it really difficult. I must have stayed there 3 or 4 years longer than I needed to, but I genuinely could say that the direction that life has sent me on since I did, I couldn't imagine what happened if I stayed there now that much longer. I think it's quite it's empowering, and it then, like you said, gives you that sense of like, hey, if I could do that there, I could do that again in another time, and I don't have to feel stuck. So you've got this. But yeah, I've got a little bit of reflection and journaling if you wanted to kind of do that. I quite like the journaling aspect, but I've got a few little questions for you if you wanted to write them down. Choose one that you really like and go for it. So one is just like a decision I'm currently avoiding is, and I like that one. It can be something really small, it gets something really big. I don't know. I'm currently, I don't know, avoiding, it could be anything. Another good question is, what am I afraid will happen if I choose? So what am I so afraid of if I actually make the choice and like leave that friendship or leave that, whatever it is? What am I afraid will happen? I mean, if you break that down, it just starts to break things down. Sometimes there's this fear in us, and there's not that many things that go on the paper. It's quite profound, actually answering these big questions. Another one is, what part of me already knows the answer? So that's something we already spoke about a little bit more. And what step could I take towards that decision today? So yeah, you could sit and answer all of them. You could answer one or two of them, but it helps you just find that clarity and that understanding. Yeah. So yeah, just a little recap for you today. Just wanted to say thank you. I hope this has been a little like little dip our toe into finding confidence in making those decisions. And yeah, my advice would be to get about, yeah, just write, maybe brainstorm some of the thoughts. If you're struggling with the how and the plan, take small, micro, little baby steps in that direction. And maybe go through your calms, center yourself, come back to asking those questions, listen to the body, keep thinking about, what it would be like if you did stay stuck, what it's going to be like for you, and then moving through thinking about, your most desired place and what that feels like and the energy that it gives you. And that should start to remind you why it's important to get to that, and then move into aligned action, one other next move. And again, it doesn't have to be massive, or if you do feel ready and it's the right time, as long as you're moving with kindness, responsibility, then make the move, and trust your intuition, trust that GPS is going to take you safely to your destination. Yeah, I think that this is something that hopefully you can use to support yourself. Sometimes you can use to support others. And hopefully, yeah, it's just a little bit of support as you move through your journeys through healing and working through anything that you might be holding on to. So with that being said, yeah, it's always nice, especially when we've been through some tough stuff, that we maybe focus on finding our confidence again. And yeah, it could be really small decisions or really big things, but hopefully that you found this a little bit helpful and some great reminders to support in future. That's your Wellbeing Wednesday. I will see you guys next month. Thank you so much for tuning in. And remember just to add any questions or comments or anything that just felt unclear. And thank you so much for bearing with my cold as well. I really do appreciate it. Yeah. All right. Take care. All the best. And yeah, you've got this. You've all got this.